How's it going, everyone? Today we're going to be continuing the examination of the documentary called Dismantled. It's been very, very interesting. We've been hearing some great arguments for creationism slash intelligent design, and things that are pretty much knocking evolution out of the park. And I mean that in probably the most sarcastic way possible. Um, a lot of this is presenting a lot of, well, there's this explanation, but what about another explanation? And a little part of why I think it's important to have these types of conversations, even though I am not a, scientific or evolutionary professional or something like that, is because we can all learn how to challenge arguments. We can all learn how to scrutinize pieces of evidence or scrutinize arguments as well, and kind of be able to weed through a lot of the fluffy language that some people use to try to kind of bolster arguments that don't have a ton of evidence to support that. So we are live on a couple of different spaces. So I'll try to keep up with answering questions on both, just to hopefully give a broader perspective on all of these things. But we'll be focusing, obviously, on YouTube comments and things. Okay, we're going to jump right in. We don't have any time to waste. Alrighty.
If Lucy's kind cannot be credited with forming the human-looking Laetoli footprints, then who or what did? In an attempt to solve this mystery, former researcher of the Laetoli footprints, Russell Tuttle, suggests a far-fetched idea.
All right.
Tuttle writes in that.
So I'm going to pause you guys just to catch you guys up a little bit if you weren't here last time. So essentially, these researchers were looking into evidence for Australopithecus afarensis as a new species, and that's Lucy. Oh, goodness gracious.
History. In any case.
Oh, guys, I messed up everything all at once. I have a picture of it behind me on the TikTok thing, but so you see it on the screen over here, Australopithecus afarensis. So essentially, it's giving a pretty good idea if it's saying that there's something that has feet that looks very human, but not quite human. So there must be something a little bit distinct about this species. It must be different, right? But let's kind of see what these guys have to say about it. They're trying to give alternate explanations.
We should shelve the loose assumption that the Laetoli footprints were made by Lucy's kind, Australopithecus afarensis. The Laetoli footprints hint that at least one other hominid roamed Africa at about the same time. Perhaps a better explanation for why the footprints look identical to humans is simply because they were formed by humans. Tuttle admits this would be the most reasonable interpretation, except for one problem.
Not really.
He believes the dating methods prove the ash layers were deposited long before the first humans evolved. But what if the dates obtained were wrong?
So this is a great example, right? They are kind of asking questions where no one else is really asking the questions. And I guess let me kind of try to explain this a little bit better. So oftentimes researchers will say, like intelligent design researchers will say, well, these evolutionists are doing bad science. Let's check their science using carbon dating to try to see how old these footprints were, how old these fossils were, etc. But then some of the issues that you'll also find are that they don't necessarily, like, they don't seem to understand some of the, like, the way, I guess, the limitations of carbon dating. There are, like I said, there are other researchers and professionals who know a lot of this stuff way better than me. So check underneath the description of the YouTube video, I've linked a playlist of Gutsick Gibbon and a couple others who have dove into this in a much more scientific fashion. I'm just going into this as a layperson. So we'll continue.
As it turns out, the Laetoli footprints were dated using the potassium-argon method, a radioisotope dating method that has an embarrassing track record of yielding exaggerated ages, millions of years, when testing its accuracy on rocks of known age that formed recently.
The major problem with all the radioactive dating methods is the first assumption, which is the initial conditions. It is assumed that when a volcano erupts and the lava flows over the ground, that all the gases escape, and when the rock cools, you only have the parent potassium in the rock, no argon. But of course, we weren't there in the past to test that assumption. And that's why it's critical that we look at present-day volcanic eruptions. And one of the things that we've discovered is that the argon doesn't escape. A classic example is at Mount St. Helens. It erupted in 1980, and scientists were able to watch the various lava flows building up the new dome. And a lava flow that we know erupted in 1986 was tested 10 years later in 1996, dated with potassium argon. What was discovered was that it gave an age of up to over 1 million years. Some of its minerals did. The whole rock gave an age of over 300,000 years for a rock that we observed form that was only 10 years old. And that's important because when it comes to the question of human evolution, we have to remember that the bones themselves were not dated with potassium argon. Often it wasn't the rock that they were buried in, because a lava flow would have melted and destroyed human bones. But we're looking at lava flows or volcanic ash deposits that are close to, in layers below or above where the human fossils are found. The ash that's spread out and deposited in the layer is of material that's already quickly congealed. And so that material is a prime candidate for quickly locking in the excess argon. And so the volcanic ash bed will invariably have problems when it's dated with potassium argon. And so if the potassium argon method can't be trusted on recent or ancient lava flows, then there's a real problem in establishing a true chronology for these supposed human ancestor fossils.
Okay.
A more reasonable interpretation of the evidence.
So another thing that they do a lot in this documentary is they will explain something, kind of like challenges with apparent like levels of argon that's in the air during current, what are those called? Volcanic eruptions. Nevertheless, not certain if there are differences in past volcanic eruptions and kind of the composition of them or anything like that. But they kind of will, like I said, once again, kind of like poke holes in just kind of, and I'm almost going to say kind of poke holes in nothing. They'll say that there's some type of a problem, but I don't really see much of a reason why just saying that this argon may not exist has somehow proven that all forms of radiometric dating are inaccurate. So, and the other thing we'll also do is probably skip through this stuff a little bit, just because last time we also discovered that it is a little bit repetitive, okay? And they drone on and on and on about some stuff. And yeah, we don't need to sit through all of this if we don't have to.
That the dating methods are unreliable, and the Laetoli footprints look human because they were formed by humans. Handyman, Homo habilis. The next alleged hominin species on the path to modern humans has traditionally been Homo habilis. The discovery of Homo habilis was announced to the world in 1964. The bones were found at Olduvai Gorge, Tanzania, and consisted of 2 broken skull fragments, a deformed lower jawbone, a partial hand, and a tooth molar. Famous paleoanthropologist Lewis and Mary Leakey claimed the fossils belonged to the earliest toolmaker and was given the name Handyman. To this day, Homo habilis is presented in textbooks as an ape-like ancestor to man. Yet few people realize there is an ongoing debate among the paleoanthropology community regarding the status of Homo habilis.
So this is another thing. I guess another thing that I'm trying to do is like point out the tactics that they use as well. So this is another tactic that they use to kind of confuse people. And they'll say that many paleoanthropologists are arguing about this. And then if you were to look into it, it's generally that no, it's really that the creation scientists may say that as well. So someone on TikTok is asking if how can I now not be a Christian? It's possible to not be a Christian, right? Yeah. Let me see one more time. Let's look at this argument. Let's look at this argument one more time. Okay. So essentially what they're saying.
Yet few people realize there is an ongoing debate among the paleoanthropology community regarding the status of Homo habilis. Most experts in the field now deny Homo habilis a position in the direct human lineage, and many others reject the validity of this species as a classification. Reject the validity of Homo habilis a position. Most experts in the field now deny Homo habilis a position in the direct human lineage.
Who? Okay. I guess let's look into it. Okay. Homo habilis. Is it disputed as a species? Okay, it's in the Smithsonian, in Natural Museum. Not a real species. Let me see. Yeah, I mean, okay, so one of the things that is debuted, I'll say really quickly, because like I said, we're learning on the spot. It seems that there is some debate as to why Homo habilis isn't considered an Australopith. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Regarding the status of Homo habilis.
So if we're looking at the skull, right? So like I said, if you're on YouTube, you can see this better. But if you're looking at the skull, when you're looking at the shape of the skull and kind of the way that the snout, I guess, juts forward, it's not that flat-faced look that you see in genus Homo as much. It's like, okay, then what did that do to be considered a genus Homo? We're not going to go all the way into that, but that seems to be where some of the dispute is in my 30 seconds of quick research that I just did about this. So I guess what I'm saying is I really don't know where they're coming with this idea that this is some greatly disputed thing, that Homo habilis is maybe it's not even a real separate species. We can just kind of absorb it into another category. I don't think that's a thing, but okay. FFF. We'll fix it. We'll fix it. We're right about here.
Humans. And others remarkably ape-like. Paleo experts have attempted to resolve these contradictory findings by reassigning the appropriate bones to the extinct ape genus Australopithecus.
Weird. So it has 3 categories. Guys, this is so bad. Okay, so they have anatomical human. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure what exactly they're categorizing as a human. Is this genus Homo is the human? Is it Homo sapiens, which is the human? They have not stated that yet. And then we're talking about Australopithecus, which I believe is a group. I believe because there's multiple different types of Australopithecus. And then it has the word ape in parentheses after that, as if Homo habilis and anatomically humans are not apes. But okay, I'm getting a little bit spicy now.
To a growing number of experts, the fossils of Homo habilis look too much like a tree-dwelling ape to be considered a human ancestor. Among them is Bernard Wood, world-renowned evolutionist.
Wow. And okay, listen, another thing that it looks too much. Let's watch one. Let's listen one more time.
The fossils of Homo habilis look too much like a tree-dwelling ape to be considered a human ancestor.
Okay, they look too much like a tree-dwelling ape to be considered a human ancestor, when tree-dwelling apes were also human ancestors. Do you guys see how sneaky this is? And I'm sneaky, like the only thing, sneaky is the only word that I feel like would accurately help people understand this, because the language that they're using is kind of very, very intentional. Remember how I said earlier, when we're watching propaganda, everything is intentional. It has to send a message. It's less about, honestly, guys, it's less about communicating true stories rather than it is about, yeah, it's more about communicating convincing stories. I'd rather say that the truth. And maybe even bringing on a feeling. Those things are also very important. Okay, we have a frozen camera situation on YouTube, but we'll see if that continues. I hope you guys can. Let me know if you guys can hear or you can't hear. If not, we'll go audio only, like we did the other day.
Among them is Bernard Wood, world-renowned evolutionary paleoanthropologist and foremost authority on Homo habilis, who has extensively studied the fossil remains for the past 50 years since its discovery. In Nature, Wood makes the following assessment. Even with all the fossil evidence and analytical techniques from the past 50 years, a convincing hypothesis for the origin of Homo remains elusive. The species is too unlike Homo erectus to be its immediate ancestor. Wood is...
So that one just used the word immediate, which is another important, which that is a little bit more accurate, right? To say that it's maybe not an immediate ancestor. That could be accurate, right? Okay.
Come to the firm conclusion that Homo habilis is not our ancestor. Homo erectus. In the late 19th century, Dutch anatomist Eugene Dubois set off to the Indonesian island of Java. Along the banks of the Solo River, he came upon a skull cap, a femur bone, and a tooth. The leg bone resembled a modern human's, but the skull cap displayed some unusual features. Dubois interpreted the skull cap as having ape-like qualities and assigned the fossils to a new species that he named Pithecanthropus erectus. The Greek name literally translates as upright ape man, in accordance with Dubois' conviction that humans evolved from ape-like creatures. Since then, a number of specimens from Africa, Europe, and Asia have been found, and all have subsequently been renamed Homo erectus, reflecting its current status as the immediate ancestor to Homo sapiens, a claim that has not been substantiated by the fossil evidence.
Wait, what?
Most of the recovered bones are highly fragile.
Let's check this really quick.
In the late 19th century, Dutch anatomist Eugene Dubois set off to the Indonesian island of Java. Along the banks of the Solo River, he came upon a skull cap, a femur bone, and a tooth. The leg bone resembled a modern human's, but the skull cap displayed some unusual features. Dubois interpreted the skull cap as having ape-like qualities and assigned the fossils to a new species that he named Pithecanthropus erectus. The Greek name literally translates as upright creatures. Since then, a number of specimens from Africa, Europe...
I just want to check into this really quick, just to make sure. Okay. So Pithecanthropus was an early name for Homo, it was kind of changed to Homo generally later. So I guess I don't want to communicate that this was some type of sneaky thing. This thing seems to be showing that, like, okay, I'm going to move this over here. Okay.
Europe and Asia have been found, and all have subsequently been renamed Homo erectus, reflecting its current status as the immediate ancestor to Homo sapiens, a claim that has not been substantiated by the fossil evidence. Most of the recovered bones are highly fragmentary.
I feel like that has not been demonstrated in this documentary yet. I don't think that this has been demonstrated well yet. Okay, well, that's kind of ridiculous. Okay, I might try to get my other camera out, but we'll work on that later. Hold on.
Consisting of fragmented skulls, jaws, isolated teeth, and a single intact femur bone. Only one nearly complete Homo erectus skeleton has been found and nicknamed Turkana Boy, recovered in Kenya in 1984. For the first time, it provided paleoanthropologists with a clearer picture of what Homo erectus looked like. The anatomy of the skeleton and overall size of Turkana Boy is unquestionably human. Dental evidence and unfused growth plates indicated to anatomists that had he lived until adulthood, he would have grown to over 6 feet tall. Experts in the field now universally acknowledge that the overall anatomy of Homo erectus overlaps extensively with modern humans. In fact, a number of evolutionary paleo experts insist upon reclassifying them.
I feel like a couple of frames ago, they said something about there only being one Homo erectus that they found. And guys, like, we would be here for hours and hours and hours if we stopped every single time there was something that we needed to double check, especially because we're lay people, right? We don't know all this stuff. We're learning and figuring this out, right? We're trying to come from a neutral perspective as much as possible. Is this thing coming with good evidence that we can trust and rely on? And it's showing that we have, over 40 that have been found in Java, like they mentioned, and also in China. If they mentioned the Java boy, if that's the same thing as the Turkana boy, then that would be accurate as well. So we're hoping that these things are accurate. So far, like I said, we're putting quite a bit of trust in these people, and so far they've not really been exactly trustworthy. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Uh-oh. Okay. Sorry, guys. We're figuring this out, like I said.
As Homo sapiens. In their view, the skeletal features fall within the range of human variation. In addition, archaeological evidence indicates Homo erectus was able to perform sophisticated tasks and complete extraordinary feats requiring modern human intelligence, including the ability to construct a seaworthy vessel and navigate significant stretches of open seas.
Paleoanthropologists have traditionally interpreted Neanderthals as a separate subhuman species. In popular movies, they're portrayed as half-stooped, brutish cavemen with low intelligence. Few people realize this mental image stems from an outdated evolutionary perception that Neanderthals are a missing link between ape and man.
Neanderthal man.
Which is accurate. That is a misconception, but I'm feeling like they're going to say that for the wrong reasons. I think that they're going to continue to say that humans are something different than this for some reason. That's the part, not necessarily something different, that humans are the same species as this, I guess. That's the main part.
In 1908, French anatomist Marcelin Boule fraudulently arranged the bones to appear ape-like with a grasping big toe and a bent kneed, bent hip posture. In his view, Neanderthals were a degenerate race, too primitive to be considered Homo sapiens. Boule's errors were eventually corrected. Now, with thousands of Neanderthal specimens and a complete skeleton assembled, it is clear to paleoanthropologists that Neanderthals were human in their anatomy, albeit more robustly built, but with few relatively minor differences. Experts on human evolution acknowledge that a Neanderthal in modern dress would go unnoticed on a New York City subway.
Okay, so they said it one more time, right? And they're doing this thing that they're not explaining well enough. that pretty much, you know, I think pretty much everything in genus Homo we tend to consider human. So yeah, why would we? Okay, so then I guess they're making it seem in this documentary that if they say that it is also human, that it's also Homo sapien. And that's obviously incorrect. They're not making it clear enough that Neanderthals, like Homo neanderthalis and Homo sapiens, are completely different species. That we did not come, they're not our direct ancestor, they're more of a cousin of ours.
Foremost authority on Neanderthals, Eric Trinkaus, confirms detailed comparisons of Neanderthal skeletal remains with those of modern humans have shown that there is nothing in Neanderthal anatomy that conclusively indicates locomotor, manipulative, intellectual, or linguistic abilities inferior to those of humans. Archaeology has further revealed an impressive cultural inventory, including fire, stone tools, tailored clothing, art, musical instruments, cosmetics, jewelry, and ceremonial burial of their loved ones, a defining aspect of what it means to be human. In 2010, Swedish geneticist Svante Pääbo and his international team of researchers sequenced the first ever nearly complete Neanderthal genome, confirming once and for all that they were fully human and members of our own species, Homo sapiens.
About 3% of my genome is Neanderthal.
No, that is just a lie. Guys. Now they're literally just lying. This is like legitimately just dishonest. I'm so upset. This is so awful. It's so terrible. Okay, we'll continue.
About 3% of your average Eurasian is Neanderthal. But if 60% of Neanderthal is amongst Eurasians, that means that we all have different pieces. When they discovered DNA in Neanderthal bones, that wasn't supposed to happen. The bones are too old. In the evolutionary model, 30,000 years ago, 50, 100,000 years ago, Neanderthal bones should have no DNA left in them. And yet they do. That was a big surprise. And when we look at the ancient DNA we can pull up and sequence DNA, it's clear multiple interbreedings happen between human, Homo sapiens, and human, Neanderthal. They're not supposed to be human. And yet 3%.
What do you mean they're not supposed to be human? That means that for every
human? 100...
Guys, like, what does he mean? Did they show what his credentials were? Let me just go back and see if they showed his credentials.
Homo sapiens. It's a surprise. All bones should have no DNA left in them. The bone amongst percent of Eurasians, that
He's
means
a geneticist. He's a geneticist. I feel like he should know better. He should know better and be able to kind of understand what the difference between a species is. You know, he really, okay. Am I asking too much? Maybe I am.
This is about the fossil record. All these things they're learning about Neanderthals recently has completely changed the picture that we were given when we were younger, especially the picture they tried to give us in the 1800s.
The age-old evolutionary assumption that Neanderthals were a subhuman species has been disproven.
That is accurate.
Evolutionary paleoanthropologists traditionally expected the hominin fossil record to reveal a traceable linear progression where an ape-like Australopithecus species, such as Lucy, evolved into Homo habilis, which evolved into Homo erectus, which evolved into Homo sapiens. In recent decades...
So once again, so many just teeny tiny little inaccuracies, just very small, very small. If you don't know what's going on, you're going to miss it. That's how quick this stuff is.
However,
let's look at that one more time. So once again, a lot of this is about language, manipulating language.
Anthropologists traditionally expected the hominin fossil record to reveal a traceable linear progression where an ape-like Australopithecus species, such as Lucy, evolved into Homo habilis.
So they're going to keep doing the whole ape-like, evolved into this and that. We know that species don't evolve into other species. We know that it's more about speciation occurring over time within populations. So kind of those rather saying that they that are ape-like direct ancestors to this other ape. And they also do the thing by saying ape-like and then human, as if there's something separate or something different. Humans are apes, obviously.
which evolved into Homo erectus, which evolved into Homo sapiens. In recent decades, however, this view has been dramatically overturned. Instead of a simple human family tree with a few branches, the paleo community now describes the hominin fossil record as a messy bush with many disconnected branches showing no clear evolutionary progression from ape to man.
This is
the pattern that is emerging in the hominin fossil record is surprising.
Like, that's a lie. That's ridiculous. There is a pretty good understanding of this pattern, and I don't know, they're just butchering the evidence.
Surprisingly consistent with the biblical view of human origins recorded in Genesis, which teaches that humans and apes were created as independent forms of life. Indeed, there appears to be a clear separation between two distinct types in the fossil record, the human type called Homo and the extinct ape type called Australopithecus. These two types are found together in rock strata of equivalent age, as far back as hominin fossils are found, just as the Laetoli footprints have confirmed. This shows that humans have always coexisted with a diversity of apes, rather than one evolving into the other.
That's so false. This is just ridiculous, guys. Guys, the Dogon did not magically see Sirius, by the way. That's not a real thing that happened. Just because a book says something, you shouldn't believe it. Okay. Great point. Thanks, Steele. The reason why some species don't evolve into humans is because they went extinct. It's not because, like, every ape wanted to be human. Right. This is so awful. This is an awful idea.
It's hard to find anyone who has not heard the often repeated claim that humans and chimpanzees are genetically 98 to 99% identical. This has been promoted to the world as proof that humans share a common evolutionary ancestor with.
Because once again, that is 100% proof. Like, obviously, so we would share, let's imagine 99.99999% DNA with, like, my parents. And that clearly means that we're related. Goodness gracious, guys. You see this sneaky stuff? It really just, it just creeps right in there. Just sneaks and snorts. Sneaks and snorts right over there.
Chimps. However, recent studies now challenge this claim.
Evolutionary geneticists have acknowledged that the actual genetic differences are far greater than we've been told. For example, primate evolutionist Todd Prius states, "It is now clear that the genetic differences between humans and chimpanzees are far more extensive than previously thought. Their genomes are not 98% or 99% identical." Earlier studies published in the evolutionary scientific literature reported an overall DNA similarity of 98 to 99%. However, large portions of the chimp genome did not align with the human genome, and so were excluded from the reported estimates. For instance, the algorithm parameters used in the major milestone publication in Nature reported by the Chimpanzee Sequencing and Analysis Consortium omitted over 100 million DNA letters. When accounting for these large...
Once again, guys, if you want a more accurate, full explanation and breakdown of all of this stuff, check the link in the description. I provided people who understand all of the biology behind this and can better explain kind of how they're manipulating this information. So just know that as they're kind of creating this argument, this entire argument is really based off of kind of a misunderstanding of biology. Okay, so let's move forward.
Non-alignable regions and other omitted sequence data, the actual chimp-human DNA similarity is significantly lower than the 98 to 99% identity claims.
When they originally started to ask that question, they didn't have full genomic data, and so they're actually based their estimates of similarity based upon just little snippets of the genome, and they were choosing protein coding sequences which are the most similar, that explain why we have similar biochemistry. So,
to my understanding, I'm pretty sure that is how this is typically done. This isn't like some weird different surprise.
Initially, we're saying, 98, 99% of the genomes must be similar between chimp and human. The textbooks still say that. But basically, geneticists know that's not correct.
That's not true.
What is the actual genetic difference between humans and chimpanzees? This is a question that comes up over and over again in this creation evolution debate. And if it is true we're 98 to 99% genetically identical to the closest evolutionary relatives, evolutionists say, It feels like they're just kissing cousins. Well, let's dig down to what the scientific data actually say. If you look at the 2005 chimpanzee genome paper in Nature, you look at subsequent papers, the bonobo paper, the gorilla paper, the orangutan paper, all of them give basically a consistent answer that most of our DNA can be aligned to chimpanzee and vice versa. And in that region that does align, it's about 1% to 2% different in terms of single letter differences. But if you say, wait a minute, are there sections of human DNA that fail to align to chimpanzee? Are there sections of chimpanzee that fail to align to human? The answer is yes. And it's far more DNA than is that 1% to 2% different. So if you incorporate all of these numbers together, the stuff that aligns is almost identical. The stuff that can't be aligned at all, you get a number about 85%. What's even more important is what that percentage translates to in terms of absolute differences. So in 85% identity, 50% difference in terms of raw DNA letters represents 300 to 400 million single DNA letter differences. That's a massive number.
The evolutionary theory claims that humans evolved from a hypothetical chimp-like ancestor roughly 6 million years ago. This is said to have occurred through a long series of beneficial mutations. In light of the actual genomic differences between humans and chimps, this is simply not genetically feasible. Which
just isn't true. Like, I really got it. Like, there's just not too much to say. We've got visuals, guys. We've got visuals. All right. Let's continue.
A more accurate chimp-human DNA similarity estimate of 85% represents 300 to 400 million DNA letter differences, an extreme level of genetic discontinuity. This means in order to evolve a chimp-like ancestor into modern humans, hundreds of millions of beneficial mutations need to arise in an ancestral population. The difficulty with accomplishing this has to do with the extremely long waiting time required for establishing even the smallest sets of mutually dependent mutations. Even granting the best case scenario.
All right, so I've watched this section before, and so we're gonna watch them essentially butcher the idea and understanding of mutations. And they're gonna kind of argue they talk about how hard it is to come by beneficial mutations and how most mutations are terrible, are awful.
Area for evolution by generously assuming human and chimp DNA is 99% identical, the remaining 1% would still be a difference of 3 million DNA letters, an impossible genetic barrier for evolution to traverse in 6 million years.
Let's assume that it's still only 1%. That's not correct. No one believes that now. But even if to get 1% of the genome different requires 3.
Wow, so they've presented very little evidence, and then now they've said no one believes that now, which they've not really established that whatsoever in this documentary. They haven't presented enough evidence to show that at all. And if they did, they should have brought someone in who was not, who was an evolutionary scientist. They wouldn't have been afraid to do that, but they clearly didn't in this documentary, because they would have laughed at them, honestly. Like that, this is silly.
30 million mutations. That's a lot of new information. And when we talked about the waiting time, we were saying, well, 8 mutations, waiting for 8 specific mutations takes more time than the time since the Big Bang. So no, it's not conceivable. You cannot change the program of an ape into the programming for a human in any amount of time. People ask, well, what's the problem? You're saying there's 100 new mutations.
Did you hear that again? You can't turn the program to an ape into the program of a human. You're right. You're right. You can't turn the programming of an ape into a human because a human is an ape. Like, they're just, ugh. It's so hard. It's so hard to kind of even talk about it because it's just, they're explaining everything in such a backwards way.
It's per person per generation in a big population that's billions of mutations every generation. What's the problem with getting the information that codes for something? Well, the difference is that genetic damage is non-specific. So deleterious mutations can happen in anywhere in the genome. There's no specificity. So creating damage is easy, but in the case of a manuscript or a program or a computer program, it's easy to break them by changing letters. It's really hard to improve them.
Once again, all of this is kind of based on the assumption that that these apes are somehow trying so hard to get these beneficial mutation to turn themselves into better humans. No. Evolution is a natural process. If it works, then it'll stay, then it'll work. If it doesn't work, then it won't work. That's essentially how it's. That's the best way to put it. That's the best way to put it. Yeah. If you survive, then you survive. If you don't, then you don't. Someone else will take over your niche, and you'll be screwed. You know, nature is heartless like that.
And you have to wait a really long time for the specific letter to mutate into a specific alternative letter at a specific site to actually create any type of benefit. So waiting time for beneficials is different from waiting time for neutrals. You don't have to wait long for a neutral or for deleterious. You have to wait a really, really long time if you're waiting for a specific and beneficial one.
That's why, yeah.
Waiting for the right mutation.
Because you're not waiting for a specific beneficial mutation. You just do things that work, and if they don't work, mutations continue forward. You know? Still again, these are old Lamarckian ideas who we haven't trusted since the 30s. And they do that again also with Darwin. They just bring him up every time, and they're like, okay, well, you know, Darwin did this, so therefore, in my opinion, and he's probably a bad person, and therefore everything he's done is bad. That's not how that works, you know?
To arise and become established in a pre-human population greatly exceeds evolutionary timescales. Leading evolutionary geneticists acknowledge it is a serious problem for the theory, devastating for the ape-to-man scenario. Population geneticist Michael Lynch confesses in the Journal of Molecular Biology and Evolution, a central problem in the evolutionary theory concerns the mechanisms by which adaptations requiring multiple mutations emerge in natural populations. Lynch's calculations suggest the length of time required for just 2 specific mutations to become established in a pre-human population is over 200 million years, well beyond the 6 million year time span during which an ape.
Well, I guess I don't know how you would calculate for these types of specific mutations, because I don't think that's not how evolution, in my understanding, works. So it's trying to look for something that's not that isn't it. That does not work.
Like creature is said to have evolved into man. Other studies reporting in scientific literature show similar results. Evolutionary geneticists Durrett and Schmidt, Cornell University, report in the Annals of Applied Probability that the average waiting time to form a slightly longer DNA sequence of 8 specific mutations is on the order of 650 million years. But this estimate is incomplete. When accounting for random loss due to a well-established principle known as genetic drift, the actual waiting time should be 100-fold longer, roughly 65 billion years. This is 4 times longer than the
I really don't know how genetic drift existing means that things have to take 100 times longer. Okay, thanks.
Reputed age of the universe,
Wow.
assuming a Big Bang singularity 13.7 billion years ago. At best, all singularity 4 times longer than the reputed age of the universe, assuming a Big Bang singularity 13.7 billion years ago.
So ridiculous.
At best, all evolution can hope to accomplish in the prescribed 6 million year time span is the formation of a tiny DNA sequence, no more than a few genetic letters in length, totally incapable of producing a...
This is completely just unestablished nonsense right now.
...single new gene. Modern genetics has demonstrated that it is impossible for humans to have evolved from a chimp-like ancestor via random mutations. It is an unbridgeable genetic gap for evolution to traverse.
So essentially, they've presented very terrible evidence, and then now they've claimed, they just asserted, there's no scientific evidence for this type of evolution. It's just too big of a gap. It cannot be breached. This is awful.
Even given billions of years.
If humans did not evolve from ape-like creatures, then where did we come from? The Genesis account of creation states that God made Adam and Eve, not as mythical beings, but as the literal historical ancestors of all living people. They were the first 2 human beings created, with all humans descending from this first couple. From a purely genetic standpoint, is it scientifically feasible that all humans descended from a single mother and a single father? Many insist this is absurd, and yet the genetic evidence for a literal Adam and Eve is inside each one of us. It's found in our DNA.
Okay, guys.
In 1987,
we're gonna see. This is great, guys. We're gonna once again watch yet another butchering of just a specific scientific understanding that is well established and well understood, called the mitochondrial Eve. I think the Y chromosome atom. They're essentially going to say, well, look, they call it Eve, so same thing as in the Bible, essentially. Let's watch.
A milestone paper was published in the journal Nature by leading evolutionary geneticists who announced the results of a mitochondrial DNA analysis. Geneticists from the University of California found that all humans are descended from one woman thought to have lived in Africa 100,000 to 200,000 years ago. Their results sent shockwaves throughout the scientific community and called for a major who have lived in Africa with a mitochondrial DNA analysis. Geneticists from the University of California found that all humans are descended from one woman thought to have lived in Africa 100,000 to 200,000 years ago. Their results sent shockwaves throughout the scientific community and called for a major rewrite of.
So right there in the beginning, let's try to see if we can. Okay. So it's talking about the mitochondrial DNA itself, right? And so guys, the other thing that's important here is not necessarily that these things are coming from this person. Was what they're talking about, like the mitochondrial Eve is this DNA. And we're saying this DNA coming from several different people. It's trying to show that just because it's connected to one specific person, they're going to try to argue that this means that this is, I guess, the only singular mitochondrial similarity that we have. But that's also inaccurate. But we'll.
California found that all humans are descended from one woman thought to have lived in Africa 100,000 to 200,000 years ago. Their results sent shockwaves throughout the scientific community and called for a major rewrite of the evolutionary view of human origins to accommodate the new data. The revision gave rise to the now widely accepted out-of-Africa theory. Proponents of the theory couldn't help but notice its uncanny resemblance to the biblical Eve. In acknowledgement of this, they gave the genetic mother of us all the name mitochondrial Eve. According to the evolutionary perspective, mitochondrial Eve was an unnamed woman who evolved out of Africa from a Homo erectus population of ape men. Not long after the first mitochondrial DNA studies revealed a single mother of us all, evolutionary geneticists found similar results when analyzing sequences on the male Y chromosome. In 1997, a team of researchers from Stanford University reported to the American Society of Human Genetics that all men inherited their Y chromosome from a single male ancestor. The sequencing of thousands of Y chromosomes from diverse people groups living around the world has revealed an overall lack of Y chromosome diversity. All men share the same Y chromosome, plus a small number of mutations consistent with a single male ancestor of the human race. Once again, evolutionary geneticists couldn't help but give the father of us all a biblical name, Y chromosome Adam. Just as they did with mitochondrial Eve, evolutionists interpret Y chromosome Adam to be an evolved ape man from Africa that lived sometime around 100,000 to 200,000 years ago.
The evolutionary community acknowledges.
Okay, so once again, even though in actual kind of genetics, we understand that there had to have been multiple of these mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosome atoms, you'll see how they kind of distort this information into their seriously, just like their biblical. This one is blatantly just their biblical narrative.
There's a literal Y chromosome Adam, and there's a literal mitochondrial Eve. They say it's clear that all of the Y chromosomes on this planet trace back to a single individual who didn't live so long ago. The Y chromosomes only passed on through the male, right? Father to son. Well, the mitochondrial chromosomes only transmitted through the female. And that chromosome, also, all the geneticists agree, all people on the planet get their mitochondria from a woman who lived not so long ago. And it's uncontested. And it turns out initially, evolutionists said, yeah, but it looks from our estimates of how long ago those individuals lived, that they didn't live in the same.
And it's crazy because they're also saying one woman, like it's a literal human, like a Homo sapien, which there's no way, if it's over a couple 100,000 years ago, this wouldn't have been a human itself, like a Homo sapien itself, but I'm not sure. Let's move forward.
Same time scale. Now, actually, if they've reworked their numbers, they're always reassessing the timescales.
Look at this. No evidence. Oh, look at them. They're always reworking the numbers.
Adam and Eve, the mitochondrial Eve and the Y chromosome Adam, they are in the same time scale.
Wow, they are. No.
There are two fundamental differences between the
You see how they had a bunch of papers for all the other stuff, but nothing for this? Nothing that showed that, oh, actually, Y chromosome Eve and, mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosome Adam lived at the same exact time, and they were kind of, actually a couple together. They didn't show any evidence to support that argument, which is kind of the whole thing that Christians write on. Jesus. That's not great.
Adam and Eve of the Bible and the evolutionary interpretation of mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosome Adam. The first difference has to do with time, and the second has to do with population size. The Genesis account indicates Adam and Eve lived recently, just thousands of years ago, and that they were the only two people alive at the time of their creation. The evolutionary model claims they lived around 100,000, 200,000 years ago and belonged to a hominin population of 10,000 individuals. But as you will see, it's not the genetic data that conflicts with the biblical account of Adam and Eve. The conflict comes from inferences about time and population.
Yes, he didn't even say that they were Homo sapiens. They just said hominid individuals. So they might not even have been the same species. But obviously in this documentary, it's so bizarre because they're taking this little piece from evolutionary science and saying, look at this. This is proof that Adam and Eve existed, even though they're saying that these creatures would have existed in a time frame that does not line up with the biblical creation story. They're willing to use anything that seems to bolster their beliefs, but ignore the fact that it kind of disproves other aspects of their messaging. That is interesting.
Population size.
Evolutionary geneticists estimate that genetic Adam and Eve lived around 100,000 to 200,000 years ago using a method known as the molecular clock. The technique relies on the assumption that mutations accumulate in certain regions of the genome at a constant rate over deep time. Evolutionary scientists have to further assume that humans evolved from a chimp-like ancestor roughly 6 million years ago in order to calibrate the molecular clock.
We really don't.
Both claims are problematic and have been...
Once again, we really don't have to assume, guys. We really don't have to assume quite at all. This is pretty well established, pretty well supported.
Called into question by the genetics community. Distinguished evolutionary geneticist David Reich of Harvard confesses in the publication Nature, the fact that the clock is so uncertain is very problematic for us. It means that the data we get out of genetics are really quite embarrassingly bad and uncertain. Scientists are now using a more straightforward approach to determine mutation rates that do not require ape-to-man evolutionary assumptions. It involves directly measuring...
That's just not true. I feel like just because, for example, if we don't even know, I'm not even sure because I've heard these guys take people out of context before, but I'm not sure if that guy was, kind of saying that in a little bit of a glib way. But yeah, that in no way means that we've stopped assuming our ancestry. And for example, to say that we have ancestors that are like chimpanzees are our ancestors, that's another false idea. Chimp-like, perhaps, yeah. But that they were chimps themselves, that is a fallacious concept right there. Boom.
Mutation rates in the present, comparing parents and offspring, known as the pedigree method. When comparing DNA sequences between parents and children, the measured mutation rates are typically 10 to 20 times higher than those inferred based on assumptions of ape-to-man evolution. When the molecular clock is calibrated using the empirically measured mutation rates, both mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosome Adam lived just thousands of years ago. In discussing the age of mitochondrial Eve, evolutionary scientists in Trends in Genetics acknowledge this discrepancy. mtDNA datasets often exhibit anomalous patterns. One of these anomalies is the discrepancy between mtDNA mutation rates observed in evolutionary timescales, for example, in dating the divergence between two species and those measured within family pedigrees. If the high mutation rates seen in some human pedigrees were used to calculate the age of our most recent female common ancestor, she would have lived just 6,000 years ago, a date more consistent with biblical Eve than mitochondria.
So I guess it's crazy to kind of assume once again that these increased rates, and then once again, this is so bizarre. It assumes that evolution does occur, but just in a different way, and that the speed is different than every other evolutionary scientist understands. they have to rely on science in order to make this make any kind of sense, but then also butcher it at the same time to make their religious conspiracy, honestly, at this point, make sense.
Eve.
There's a long-standing debate and argument in genetics, and that deals with the difference between what's called the phylogenetic mutation rate and the genealogical mutation rate. If you look at a family, you can count the differences between the people and you say, oh, they've had some mutations. And you can actually calculate a mutation rate over time in today's time, in known time. Right now, we know what the mutation rate is. But the evolutionary community doesn't like to use that rate because it's too fast. They use what's called a phylogenetic mutation rate. That is, they look at the difference between humans and chimpanzees, not the real rate, but the differences, and they say, oh, we've been separated for so many millions of years. And when I was an undergraduate, that difference was 3 million years. Now it's 6 million years, 6.5 million years. Some people are arguing for 13 million years because mathematically they're having a hard time dealing with this. Take the differences between humans and chimpanzees in some gene.
So once it's just tough. Like, I feel like this is once again essentially saying that, hey, if your science is ever off, if you kind of make a mistake, if your science gets better and you get more accurate, well, that's too bad. Interesting.
Like mitochondria, Y chromosome, something like that, divided by the time it separates us, 6 million years, you get a very slow mutation rate. But if you look at the people alive today, count up the number of differences between them, and divide by the time since their ancestor, maybe their great-great-grandfather, something like that, you're going to get a mutation rate much faster. When we use that rate, Adam and Eve fall into the biblical time frame. So when we use today's science, measurable science, laboratory stuff we know is true, Adam and Eve are biblical.
While the actual genetic data reveals a single mitochondrial Eve.
Wow, they sped through that so fast because of all of this stuff. Therefore, Adam and Eve is biblical. We just went to the mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosome Adam, and then moved so quickly to kind of prove how this stuff is actually proof for Adam and Eve, the mitochondrial version being biblical.
Ancestor and a single Y chromosome ancestor, evolutionists have insisted they must have lived in a larger population. For this reason, they caution the general public not to mistake the evolutionary Adam and Eve with Adam and Eve of the Bible. Yet they acknowledge there can be no direct evidence for the larger population size of 10,000 because all other mitochondrial and Y chromosome lineages supposedly died off, removing all traces of their existence, leaving, as paleo expert Chris Stringer has said, just one lucky mother and one lucky father. In an attempt to explain what would otherwise be another remarkable biblical coincidence, proponents of the ape-to-man model invoke what is known as coalescent theory. This theory assumes that over many generations, it is inevitable that eventually only a single mitochondrial and Y chromosome lineage will remain.
Coalescence theory is based upon the assumption of random mating. So you need a single population and all the people have equal likelihood of intermarriage. That's never been the case. From an evolutionary point of view, humans and prehumans have always been in tribes that are separated. So there's not random mating. In fact, if you look at the charts that show coalescence, all you have to do is say, okay, that's one subpopulation, but there's dozens or hundreds of other subpopulations, and those would be producing a different coalescence to a different Adam or a different Eve. Basically, the coalescence argument fails. So their rebuttal position is not scientifically valid, and it's relatively reckless.
Wow, I guess like this is kind of showing that I'm guessing this is showing maybe some type of thing where there's multiple different like sources of where something comes from. I'm not exactly sure. Yeah.
Coalescence to it.
But we know that before they've just kind of stated for no reason that this thing doesn't work scientifically, and then that was kind of it. Also, we lost visuals again. We're gonna have to just go audio only.
Different Adam or different Eve. Basically, the coalescence argument fails. So their rebuttal position is not scientifically valid, and it's relatively reckless.
Evolutionary scientists reason that if humanity started with just 2 people, it could not explain the total amount of human diversity we see today. For this reason, a population of 10,000 became a central tenet of the current model.
I don't think that that's accurate to say, like, oh, they're putting this in such a bad way. It's not saying that to make our story work, this is what we need. It's like the evidence shows us that this is how this works. So this is why we use this amount of numbers and population sizes. Strange.
It's typically assumed that Adam and Eve would have had no genetic variance, no genetic diversity. However, there's no reason to assume they were created as nearly identical clones. If Adam and Eve were created with built-in diversity for traits such as
even though Eve was a clone from Adam's rib? Come on, guys.
Skin color, all of the different looking people groups could easily arise in a biblical time frame. There would be no reason to wait millions of years for the slow accumulation of mutations if the diversity was encoded in their genomes right from the beginning.
If Adam and Eve were heterozygous, as we would reasonably expect, extensive genetic diversity would quickly arise simply through sexual reproduction, which reshuffles pre-existing variation to produce different combinations of traits.
This idea that God creates an initial pair with differences between them and within them, we'll call that term, the technical term is heterozygosity. So this is an idea that has massive consequences in modern genetics and virtually all of our genetic discussions. It also provides a convenient explanation, a very plausible explanation for how you get all the ethno-linguistic differences that we see today. Humans are considered one species, and we can produce variety in a single generation. So if a dark-skinned Sudanese person marries a light-skinned Finnish individual, their children will be an intermediate skin tone and have features from both parents. And if you had a Australian Aborigine who marries a Han Chinese, and they had children, and so then the offspring of these two mixed marriages had children, they could produce a whole diversity of individuals. Why is that? Because people today still have heterozygosity.
Wow, that's crazy how they just are saying like, well, two people, they can combine genetics and their genetics gets mixed up, so we're okay. Guys, incest is still a problem for genetic reasons, and that would still be a problem for Adam and Eve. Come on.
They have less heterozygosity than what I'm saying Adam and Eve had. In other words, Adam and Eve could have produced in their many children every version of human that we see today. Once you have an original pair, original population, an original set of 8 if we're talking about the flood, that has heterozygosity, you can explain people groups just like that.
You really can't.
A striking example of built-in genetic variation can be seen in the example of twins born from mid-brown parents. Mother Kylie Hodgson and father Remy Horder gave birth to twins Remy and Kian, who appeared racially different. The two-tone fraternal twins shared the same womb and were born a minute apart. What most people would typically see as racial differences arose in a single generation due to gene segregation. Just like people living today, one can reasonably expect Adam and Eve to have had a large pool of genetic variation built in to their genomes. Prior to modern genetics, evolutionary scientists claimed that there were fundamentally different races of humans that evolved in diverse parts of the world over a long period of time. This model is known as the multi-regional hypothesis. This perception changed with the advent of DNA sequencing. This model is known as...
Oopsie. Have never heard of this before at all, and I don't know if that's real in any way. Like, for example, this might be one hypothesis, but I don't think that this is anything that's used by modern science. I've never heard of this in one bit.
The multi-regional hypothesis. This perception changed with the advent of DNA sequencing, which revealed that all human beings are remarkably similar genetically. It is now well established among the scientific community that all people, regardless of their skin color or ethnicity, are 99.9% genetically identical. The so-called racial features that we tend to focus on are essentially only skin deep, reflecting trivial differences in our genetic material. Physical traits like eye shape and melanin production amount to a minuscule 0.012% difference in our DNA. This means that regardless of our cultural differences...
And like, I guess one other thing that... look how much diversity is in 1% difference with all the humans. It makes it seem a little bit less crazy how different things have been. With if there's it's like a 1.1 or whatever percent difference. When a whole percentage difference, damn, a lot could happen then.
Genetically, we are all part of one big human family.
If you have designed organisms, created organisms, they would be designed and created so they have internal diversity. You don't have to wait for mutations. So the waiting time goes away. If you want adaptation without deep waiting time, then just design the organism with variants in it. Even a single organism has heterozygosity. And so there's lots of genetic diversity, even in a single organism. 2 individuals have 4 chromosome sets, and they have the ability to basically accommodate every possible variant. So 2 people is enough to allow for vast amount of genetic diversity that could be used by natural selection be used for adaptation to new environments. And you don't need deep dive to do that.
The findings from modern genetics have compelled evolutionary scientists to develop a revised story of human origins that shares many striking similarities with the biblical account of the Tower of Babel dispersion. The new model is called the Out of Africa theory and has been popular for many years. This theory proposes there was a near-extinction event causing a population bottleneck that reduced humanity to a single breeding population of just a few thousand survivors.
In the Out of Africa theory, which is now on the rocks, but in the Out of Africa theory, they postulated there was a human population of about 10.
Oh, they hate the Out of Africa theory, which is so crazy. It's crazy because they can go like, they can say that our differences are only 1% or 0.1 whatever percent difference, or 0.01. You know what I mean? There's probably several zeros anyway. But yeah, they don't like the Out of Africa.
10,000 people for an indeterminate amount of time. They never really say how long it is, but let's say 10,000, 100,000 years. If we compare a modern species that has about that many individuals, you can look at the African cheetah. There's about 10,000 of them in the wild, give or take a few thousand, and they're having massive problems. Birth defects are increasing, reproductive incompatibility in couples is increasing, litter size is decreasing. All the population biologists are essentially assuming cheetahs are going to go extinct. How did Homo sapiens evolve? We supposedly went from Homo erectus to Homo sapiens. Homo erectus is smashing rocks together, and Homo sapiens that can fly to the moon. During a population bottleneck, it should have driven us to extinction.
I don't know why. I just feel like they're just being dicks now. I guess they just talked about how the Neanderthals were so intelligent and all of this stuff, and then it's just so bizarre. Because I guess smashing rocks together in order to make tools is really impressive. That takes a lot of mental steps to see a spearhead inside of a rock. That is something very unique to what I understand is, at least we've seen it in primate populations and like other apes and stuff.
This theoretical near-extinction event has been used to explain why all humans are nearly identical genetically. The Out of Africa theory claims all living humans originated from this small population who lived in the general vicinity of Northeast Africa. Alternative studies suggest the small founding population was a little further north.
Oh, and the other thing is it's kind of having this argument that if a population sizes get small, then there is going to be issues, but that doesn't always happen. You know what I mean? They can't assume that, okay, well, what will happen in cheetahs? That means it must have happened in humans. We can't assume that.
Of the Middle East. The survivors of this theoretical near-extinction event suddenly grew very rapidly, splitting into numerous smaller tribes which dispersed outward and gradually filled Europe, Africa, Asia, and eventually the Americas. Each initial tribe gave rise to its own language and culture and continued to split and disperse to form the people groups and languages we see today. Each migrating tribe would have carried with it a different sampling of the original population's gene pool, rapidly producing the distinctive features that some use to define race. In this model, mutations would occur, but are not necessary to explain these distinctive features, which means deep time would not be required either.
Just using standard population genetics principles, we can explain the origin of races easily in hundreds or thousands of years. All we need is the population to fragment into smaller populations. Isolation by distance is going to cause changes over time independently in each population.
Which is so bizarre. They can think about changes over time happening in a population, but they can't understand how Homo erectus can be an ancestor for Homo sapiens. Really, guys, this is just so strange. So strange. It really, the only explanation is biblical ignorance. Is I literally can't look at this logically, because if I do, my faith will get hurt.
Selection or just random drift. So we have a model for that at the Tower of Babel. A few hundred years after the flood, God separated the nations according to Y chromosome. It's the male lineages that define each population, and they spread out on the earth, and they would have remained separate from one another because of language differences for a time. That's all we need. Once you do that, you're going to have regional differences amongst the people. So all of a sudden we have people start looking more Asian, people that start looking more Norwegian, people that start looking, all we need.
Evolutionary geneticists reporting in the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences have named this specific model the instantaneous divergence model. This model is virtually indistinguishable from the biblical model of the human dispersion associated with the Tower of Babel, as recorded in Genesis chapter 11. Now the whole earth...
Which is so interesting because it's like, this, by the way, would have humans being together, I think, for a much longer time to have established such intelligence to be able to build as complex structures as they were before separation. I don't know if that actually occurred.
Earth had one language and one speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. Therefore its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole earth. And from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of the whole earth.
One of the funny things about the out of Africa theory is that it actually mirrors the biblical account. We have population of people that originated in Africa sometimes in a distant past. Well, biblically, we started with 2 people. Our population grew to thousands of people. We don't know how many. And then our population crashed biblically at the flood. Well, in the out of Africa theory, we had a lot of people and it crashed. They're in a bottleneck.
Yeah, but a bottleneck of 8 people and a bottleneck of like several thousand is a very different thing, guys. This is what the average Christian is going to be consuming. This is why they're so confident in making fun of evolutionary scientists. Because of this shit.
And then the population began to grow in both models, and then the population fragmented and spread across the world in both models. The Bible was written first, and we're stuck with it. There's a limited range of possibilities biblically about human history. Back in the day, though, evolutionary theory,
that is one of your biggest issues there. I could make an entire video on just that one sentence. Because of the Bible, there's only a limited amount of possibilities that we can rely on. Otherwise, our entire framework disintegrates. So they have to be very careful of what they can accept and what they can't accept. That's why you see them going about back and forth and back and forth, right?
They could say whatever they wanted. And the most common view back in the day was a multi-regional hypothesis that human beings just evolved in synchrony across the planet and exchanged genes as we evolved and evolved and evolved. They did not expect a bottleneck. They did not expect going through the Middle East. They did not expect a Y chromosome atom and the mitochondrial leave. Those are things that have to be true if the Bible's true. And those are things that the modern geneticists have discovered.
It's so crazy.
So what we're seeing over time is that the evolutionary model is getting more biblical, which is really interesting.
It's not. Oh my God, guys. You see how they like, they're simultaneously saying evolution is so stupid and wrong. And scientists or whatever. So my brain farted literally in the middle of that sentence. Hold on.
It's getting more biblical.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Both, we can't trust evolutionary scientists. We can't trust evolutionary scientists. And evolution is getting more biblical. So evolution is great, but also we can't trust it. But hopefully it's going to be more biblical, but also it's bad.
Which is really interesting.
Throughout this documentary, we have examined key evidence from the major fields of science, including biology, paleoanthropology, and modern genetics. We have seen that the evidence from real observational science is consistent with the major origins-related events described in Genesis.
No,
the
we have
tide is
not found
changing.
that.
Scientists and scholars are beginning to see Genesis as far more than a book of myth, but as a reliable account of our origins.
No.
Thanks for joining us on this fascinating journey through science and history. I look forward to seeing what new discoveries science will bring and the impact it will have on the creation and evolution debate. Until next time, I'm Rebecca Tadros.
Which is crazy, guys. This is how you turn like no evidence for evolution into evidence. I don't know even what to say. I don't know what to say. Oh my God. Yeah. You guys get what I mean? You guys get what I mean when I say that this stuff is pretty dishonest? You know? Yeah. Someone says on TikTok says evolution doesn't debunk God. Great. That's fine. We don't need evolution to debunk God. That's not the point of this. That's not the point. I don't care about debunking God. This is about looking at evolution and evolutionary science. And also how they're butchering evolutionary science and how stupid that is. How frustrating it is. Yeah. Okay. Well, this has been a nice long little chunk of a video over here. So we'll pause here on the YouTube side, and come back next week, with something else potentially, evolution related. I've been reading a little bit of some of the work by Franz de Waal, and it would be interesting to look into kind of primates and how cool they are, just a little bit. Fangirl over primates, and have some fun about and learn about their intelligence and how people are silly and say that they're wild animals that just throw poop at each other and are mean. But, maybe they are a little more sophisticated emotionally than we think. But, or maybe we'll talk about something else. Who knows? Mysteries. Very exciting stuff. Okay. Thanks for watching. Have a good one. Oh, make sure to look down below to check out the Discord server that exists, and follow on TikTok because we do a lot of lives over there and debates and stuff. So great. Have a good one. Bye-bye. All right.